Hi, Morgan with the Event Answer here to give you 5 essentials to planning an outdoor event. The things you need to remember if you're going to be outside. The first thing to think about is shelter. Where are you going to be having your event outside? Are you going to be honestly in an open area, or is there some kind of shelter provided? Are you at a park where there's already shelters provided? Will you be renting a tent? Are you in a rustic barn out on someone's property? These are all things you need to think about and have somewhere for people to go, either to get out of the sun and find a shady spot. If there's a chance of it raining, you need to have somewhere for people to go. So you need to think about shelter. Where is your event going to be happening, and what will people be doing inside of that? The second essential is power. How are you powering your event? If you're going to be outside, is there already hardline electrical? If there is, you need to make sure that electrical is turned on. So when you're scouting out the site, take a fan or a lamp or something with you, your phone charger, and test out the outlets and make sure they actually work where you need them. If you were on a public property, you might need to check with the city or municipality and make sure those outlets are turned on. Sometimes it requires an event permit to do so. If your venue does not have its own power, you may have to bring your own. A lot of times people turn to generators to make that happen. When you have a generator, you need to be strategic about it though. Find out how much power do you actually need. Are you going to have lights? Are you going to have a DJ or music? Do your caterers or any of your venue people, do they need power? And if so, you need to find out that up front before you invest in renting a generator, because they come in many different levels. If you have a small generator, it may power just a couple things, but it may not power a whole band or light system. So you need to make sure you're producing enough power for your event. You also need to think about the strategic placement of your generators. Where do you need that power? And then how far away can you put your generator so you're not hearing it while your venue is going on? The third essential is restrooms. I feel like this is a topic that most people don't want to talk about, but it's essential if you're planning an event. If your venue has restrooms available, you need to make sure that there's enough restrooms to meet the capacity. If you're in someone's backyard doing a private dinner, if you're in a park that has its own public restrooms, you need to make sure that your ratio is 1 restroom for every 25 guests. If you can't meet that ratio, you need to think about bringing extra restrooms to the party. No one wants to look at a porta potty, and it's something that's easy to get a hold of. They're easy to rent. Most porta potty companies now offer classier versions. You're not stuck with the single non-flushing blue canisters that we're used to seeing. There's lots of high-end options now. Trailers that have multiple restrooms in them with running water, AC, ventilation, with full sinks and all the accoutrements. So find options that work for the style of your event. If it's a music festival and it's not a big deal that you have fancy restrooms, by all means go for the porta potty. Or if it's a finance issue, choose the cheaper option. But if you need something that has a little bit more class to it, look into the trailers and upgrade those porta potties. There's lots of options out there. One other thing to think about when you're bringing restrooms onto the site of your event, you need to make sure that they're accessible and easy to find, but don't put them in a place where they'll be an eyesore. Think about if you're setting up a wedding, make sure your porta potties are not in the back of the photos of your event. If you've got a stage or key areas where people are going to be gathering or where they'll be taking lots of photos, don't put your porta potties in line of sight. Put them around the edge of a building. If there's shrubberies or trees available, tuck them in where they're not in plain sight. Just make sure they're easily accessible and there's plenty of signage available to point people in the right direction. The fourth thing you need to consider when planning an outdoor event is the needs of your guests. If you're going to be outside, more than likely it's going to be hot, it may be cold, it may be a little breezy. Take care of your guests. If it's going to be chilly, if it's an evening event, provide heaters. If you know it's going to be a hot day, find cooling fans or tents or shade, or provide little hand fans if possible to your guests and give them ways to be comfortable. Also think about other needs. If it's going to be hot, provide water bottles, or if it's cold, provide hot beverages and places for them to warm up and get out of the elements. Something else to think about when you're outside is bugs. There's always bugs. So if you're going to be somewhere where you know that it hasn't been treated for bugs, provide your guests with bug spray, or in your invitation, mention the fact that they should bring their own. You don't want people to be eaten up at your next event. The fifth essential part of having an outside event is having a weather plan. You cannot always count on there to be perfect weather. I live in the Midwest where it can be sunny one moment and thunderstorm the next. So have a plan of action detailed of how you're going to execute if there's bad weather. I've been a part of a wedding before where our backup plan for this outside wedding was we would just move into the reception venue. And that was the plan. There was no pre-logistics laid out of how are we going to get people there? How will we set up the wedding in this reception space? How will we move the tables and who will do it? These are the things you need to consider in detail ahead of time for your rain plan. Another essential part of a good weather plan is communicating that plan to not only your vendors and your patrons, but also the guests. I recently helped at a music event where it started to rain, and we had every cell phone number of every vendor who was going to be there, and they had the exact listing of what we would be doing. On top of that, you need to let your guests know. If it's an open community event, put it out on social media that you're rain delaying or you're moving your location. Let people know ahead of time so there's no guess of whether your event is happening or not. Something to also consider is when to call or reschedule your event. You can rain delay for a certain amount of time, but at some point you have to make the call of whether to cancel or reschedule. And set out that criteria ahead of time. Don't try and figure that out in the heat of the moment. Get with your committee or your planners and organizers and figure out who will make that call and at what point will that be made. And then once you've made that decision, how will that information be distributed to your guests and vendors? So those are the top 5 essential parts of planning an outdoor event. If you have any questions about planning your outdoor event, leave them in the comments below and I might just answer them in a future video. Thanks for watching!